most spiritual work is invisible. Most personal growth work, like you're not going to see it, and as tangible as it gets is maybe like notes in a journal or something like that. Like it really is such an internalized process, and you're not going to get there by, like you said, doing yoga and doing all these external spiritual things. It really is about asking yourself hard questions and correcting yourself. And I try to think of like self-parenting as the best way that I can put it, because self-parenting kind of encompasses like the disciplinary side of self-care as well. So like self-care can be having those tough conversations with yourself as much as it is having a nice bath and giving yourself, a vacation or an hour off or whatever it is. And so asking yourself, why am I like this? Or, why did it serve me to have this habit?
Many people want to navigate life with peace and joy, but struggle to connect to their intuition. They find themselves overwhelmed, burned out, and frustrated. My name is Francesca Phillips, and I'm obsessed with spirituality and psychology and how the two can intersect to help you live a successful and intuitive life. I believe each of us can accomplish amazing things through balance and healthy habits instead of burnout. Consider this your go-to resource for where spiritual wellness and mindful productivity meets practical wisdom. If you're craving positivity and want to know how to find the answers within instead of searching endlessly without, then you're in the right place. Get ready to feel supported and inspired. This is the Good Space Podcast. You're listening to the Good Space Podcast, episode number 30. Before we dive in, I want to give my warm appreciation to our reviewer of the week, the Drew5150. And they say, Francesca provides really great insights into why balance is important and the concepts to guide you. What sets her apart is her ability to provide actionable steps to find that balance. I love the thoughtful real-world examples. Thank you so much, the Drew5150, for your kind and thoughtful words. It means a lot that the tools I've shared have helped you. If you want to be highlighted in an upcoming episode and help further the mission of the Good Space, make sure to subscribe and give us a review on Apple Podcasts, so I can then highlight your review in an upcoming episode. It only takes a minute. You can pause the episode and come right back. Make sure to screenshot this episode on your phone and tag us on your Instagram story at @FindYourGoodSpace, #TheGoodSpace, to let me know that you're joining in today, as you know that I love to share those screenshots on our stories too. Welcome to the Good Space Podcast. Today we're going to have a conversation with such a special guest. Her name is Roshni, and she's a self-worth coach and content creator. She has a background in psychology and education and is passionate about anti-oppression work through building self-worth in her clients and audience. She is Gujarati, hopefully I said that right, was born in Kenya and migrated to the US at the age of 5. As a third culture kid, she explores the dissonance between growing up in America, experiencing life as an immigrant, and navigating what it means to be a part of communities that don't always claim you. Roshni centers her work around the belief that we are intrinsically enough. She believes that we do not have to prove, achieve, or earn our worth, despite what we're told by our patriarchal, heteronormative, transphobic, racist, and capitalist society. She's committed to showing her clients and audience how to strip back the conditioning and limiting beliefs, focus on their purpose, and believe in themselves enough to follow through. Welcome, Roshni, to the Good Space Podcast.
Thanks so much. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so grateful you're here. And to give a little bit of context to the person listening right now, I found you because I read this article on Medium called "The Self-Help World Needs to Stop Ignoring Its Privilege." And so, of course, that piqued my interest because I feel like the Good Space is definitely in the self-help world. And I've always felt like there were gaps or like spaces in the spiritual self-development world that weren't being addressed. And so I felt like when I landed on this, it just like spoke to those parts of my soul that I didn't know how to like address or focus on. And so I want to thank you for being brave enough to speak out about that and to share what you did. And I'm excited to talk to you about the toxic side of spirituality.
Absolutely. Me too. I completely agree. I didn't really even think anyone would resonate with it, but I was just like, I need to say this. And I don't really even know where it came from because that was the first time I've written on Medium. That wasn't something that I normally do as part of my content. But yeah, I mean, it's gotten so many views and I've made so many new friends and started new relationships just, through people in this space that feel the same way. And so I'm glad that I said something because there clearly is a need for people to address those gaps, like you said.
Yeah. And it's cool because just on like, I mean, I'm a white girl, but even with that, I know that there are parts of the spiritual movements that I don't resonate with, and that I feel like, oh, like, do I have to fit into this mold? Do I have to fit into like this idea of what a spiritual person is? And I can't imagine then being an immigrant and, just like of a different culture and like all of those other things that could maybe make you feel that way even more. So what was it that finally made you realize that there's not like one way to do this, and that there was something wrong? Because I know that you mentioned how you had an idea of what a proper personal growth coach should look like, or someone in this space should act like. So what was that moment for you?
Yeah, I mean, just starting with that, like I thought, mainly the people that I saw were, white and, conventionally attractive and were wealthy, or at least looked wealthy on Instagram, and, just kind of had all those things down. And so a lot of what I kind of started my business around was like, how can I look professional? How can I look even better than I am? And obviously, being professional is important in a business, but that doesn't necessarily translate to a certain type of Instagram aesthetic. Do you know what I mean? So like, I think I had to kind of, by looking at different coaches and by looking at, just reading through different books and different content that people put out, I realized I was coming to the same questions over and over again. And some of those questions, some of those things actually had to do with appropriation and, being Indian, obviously, yoga and breath work and a lot of those things have, Hindu or Indian origins. And then to see it kind of completely changed and done, basically kind of transformed to help white people profit. And, while things are also changing. And then, I think yoga really was one of the biggest things that kind of put up a red flag for me, because it was something that I did, all throughout college. I would spend an hour, sometimes 2 hours a day, every day doing yoga. And it was something that I just absolutely loved. And this was a little bit before my spiritual journey fully started. So while I was feeling and kind of familiar with mindfulness and feeling that through my journey, I wasn't necessarily aware of, all the guru's teachings and different things like that, and even chakras and all of that. And so as I kind of started to do more research, and obviously, I knew that it was Indian in origin, but then seeing, goat yoga come out and like hit power yoga and all these things that just don't encompass the full meaning of what yoga is, or, yoga that takes breath out of it. Like breath work is such an important part of, that's something that you can do on your own or like as its own concept, but then it's also brought into yoga because that's really kind of where the spiritual aspect comes from as well. And so to take that out of it, it's like we're missing the point, and this is now a completely different beast, but it's called this thing. And so now this entire Western world sees it from this specific way. And now also Indian people aren't profiting off of it. It's hard for me to, find an Indian yoga teacher at all, whether it's in my area or even online. And so that was just one small aspect of the spiritual world that I was like, this is so off. And like, I feel weird now going to a yoga studio with like a million different classes that have nothing to do with yoga and paying for that, like, so I think that just kind of gives you a small insight into some of the things that I was noticing.
That's really interesting, because I practice yoga for sure, and I've had spiritual experiences doing it, but I can definitely see what you mean when it's like the pure sense of it. It can be robbed a little bit from how it's been commercialized. And, I kind of feel that way sometimes too, just about God or like religion. Like I believe in God, and I know there are certain things that I feel like, ooh, that kind of like capitalizes on or like rips off the purity that it can have. Obviously, everyone has their own relationship with it, but like as far as in my experience. And so okay, so you had this journey where it sounds like you probably just like started your spiritual journey and you were like at the beginning stages, and then it evolved into this more in-depth practice. So what was your spiritual practice before, and did you change it? Has it evolved? Like, what does it look like now?
Yeah, my spiritual practice now is completely different. Before I really thought of yoga more as like, I did think of it as mindfulness, but it really was part of like a workout for me. I had those connected moments while doing it, but I wouldn't say that was necessarily something I did for my spiritual practice. But what I've been doing now is actually meditating and then journaling a little bit, depending on kind of where my head is. Sometimes when I feel really scrambled, I'll just start stream of consciousness writing. So I won't really address any certain prompt. I'll just kind of get it out on the page. And then after that, usually I'll come to some sort of struggle that I'm having, or maybe a question that I have, or somewhere where I'm like, should I focus on putting my energy into this, or should I focus on letting it go? And those kinds of questions will come up for me naturally. And so when I have that kind of question, I will actually pull some tarot cards for it. So if it's a decision, I'll pull cards for each choice. If it's just a question, I'll pull a card or two and just kind of see what I get. And then I'll go ahead and just journal a little more, or write some bullet point notes on how I interpret that information. So my spiritual journey has definitely taken a complete 180. But that's kind of where I am now, and I've been loving it.
That's great. I love that. And I think what's really cool too is it's a very personalized decision, right? Like what you practice, what actually gets you to that space. So for someone listening who likes yoga and likes those other things, it's not that those things are bad. Like if you feel a benefit from it, by all means, like do it. But how would you say to someone, this is how you know what is based in toxic positivity or spirituality, and this is based on like your genuine desire from your soul? Like how can you know the difference for what actually serves you the best?
So do you mean like in terms of like, for an example, finding a yoga teacher that might be kind of coming from that toxic place, and finding one that might be coming from like a more understanding spiritual sense? Or
yeah, because I feel like when I first read your article, I was like, oh yeah, like toxic spirituality and positivity exists. And it kind of like not gave me panic, but it's like, oh, what am I not aware of that maybe I'm not listening to, or I didn't know that this was actually more toxic than it was. So like, what would be a good way for someone to know for themselves what works for them spiritually and what doesn't? Like, what are the signs or the symptoms, or like, yeah, if that makes sense.
yeah, definitely. I guess it really is. I mean, part of it is how you feel, right? If you feel pressured, or if you feel like even positive advice is triggering you to making you feel that you don't feel good enough, or that you're not good enough, or that you constantly need to change, then I would say that that's kind of a red flag, when you could ask yourself, okay, is this hurting me more than it's helping me? And I go through phases where sometimes all I follow on Instagram and online is like personal growth coaches and, people in the spiritual world. And sometimes I need to take a break and mute a lot of people or unfollow people. And eventually I'll go back to them. It's not, like I have anything against people like certain people, but it's more just that sometimes you can just get to a point where personally it's too much. And sometimes we all need rest. And so it's okay to take a break from personal growth as a whole, and kind of create the relationship and create the newsfeed on your own terms. So that's just something that I wanted to say from the get-go. But also, I think with yoga specifically, like if someone doesn't mention breath at all during yoga, or if someone doesn't mention, the importance of just breathing, flowing, connecting with the body, because I've had white yoga teachers that are amazing, and I've had like really powerful spiritual experiences in those classes. So it's not like you can look at someone and say, okay, well, they're white, so they're going to suck, but are they actually teaching from the root of yoga? And so that's something that I would consider in that example. And then also just, if you can, as much as possible, going to the sources of a lot of information. So I don't have like a list at the top of my head, but depending on if you're interested in yoga, or if you're interested in breath work, look at kind of the source. So maybe do a quick jump or a quick dive into like the history of a particular spiritual practice that you're interested in, even if it's meditation or whatever. And then kind of by doing just a quick Google search into the history, maybe you'll find a couple of more original texts that are translated, or something that, is more from this source. And that will give you a better idea of, okay, is this person that's now on Instagram, are they kind of spot on with where they're pulling from this, or are they just really off base? And a lot of that knowledge you can get from, books, or from audiobooks, or from things like that are accessible, but not necessarily always from a modern source, if that makes sense. And that's just to kind of get started. And then, you can grow and find more people that are doing that in real time.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned that, because we're so quick to just accept any knowledge and information out there, whether it's Instagram, whether it's whatever, without checking the background, without doing more research to actually be truly informed and to make decisions. And I really like that idea of just like get yourself even a little more informed so that you can really know for yourself if this is a good thing for you or not. And kind of segueing into in your article, you talked about that, you know, there were some instances where people would use self-help jargon like growing in sisterhood and manifesting an abundance mindset, all to like join a pyramid scheme. And it's like, obviously in that instance, like, no, like that's not spirituality. That's not positive, you know, a positive space. And so obviously I feel like those are more obvious, right, than like other things. But it's interesting how when the intention is not pure, that some people can manipulate and use something that's inherently good and like make it toxic. And yeah, I think that's really interesting. And so tell me about where you said the personal growth conversation needs to extend from self-care to community care. So what was your thinking behind making that statement?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that we as individuals focus so much on like, am I okay? Am I okay? But sometimes we forget how like good it can also feel to help a neighbor, or how like, you know, I've seen that meme around where it talks about like suicide prevention, and it says like, while, you know, yes, there's hotlines and all of that is very helpful, but like, that's not the only thing we can do. Like it also has to do with, are people able to find housing? Are people able to find food? Are people able to afford their bills? Are they able to, you know, have access to healthcare? Like there's so many things that goes into someone's quality of life. And so if there's anything that you can do to make a difference, like in terms of just considering your community. So, and there's so many different ways to do that. Like a lot of times we try to overcomplicate things, but you know, in my neighborhood, in especially the downtown areas, like in front of people's houses, there's just little tiny libraries or little free pantries. And so people will trade books, or people will leave canned food and things like that. And it's like, how simple is that to build something like that? It's not something that you have to spend, you know, 4 hours a day doing, but it's something that can actually make a positive difference in your community. And, you know, just different things like that. Like you can get creative and you can find whatever your specific skills are. And especially with, you know, the internet, especially with Zoom calls and how everyone's using those these days, like we have such a greater access to different communities and different people out there. So sometimes your community may not be your local area, but it may be the people that you relate to online. And that's okay too, you know, but finding some ways to just kind of consider your community and see what you can do. And so something that, like, to use my life as an example, it's really important for me to always have free content, whether that's on YouTube, on Instagram, as my podcast. Like all three of those are things that I consistently put content out on, because I want people to have access to these things for free. And then obviously, if you want to work closely with me, you can pay for one-on-one coaching or whatever, you know, the item may be at the time to work with me closer. But that's at least a way that people all over the world through the internet can get access to, you know, talking about mental health or being introduced to some of these concepts of spirituality. So there's a lot of different ways, but I think that, you know, it's exhausting to always be focused on yourself, and you can always kind of make mountains out of molehills sometimes if you're constantly focused on, I need to be better, I need to fix this, because again, at the central core of that is the idea that you're not good enough, right? So you're constantly focusing on that, building that idea up without really even realizing it. And sometimes you just need to step out of yourself, and that can still be personal growth.
Yes. And I want to take this even a little deeper, because it reminds me of what Gary Zukav talks about with the ego, and how the ego is always trying to feel safe and secure. And that can manifest in selfishness or feeling disconnected or separate from other people. And that's essentially what you described, that many people can take spirituality as an opportunity to be selfish. And granted, it's great to work on yourself. It's great to improve, but at the cost of like cutting off your oneness with other people. I think that's when that's the ego, and that's not true spirituality to me. And it's obviously something I work on. Like, am I making sure I'm reaching out or like connecting or seeing everything as one? And I know that you mention that you believe in manifesting and visualizing your goals, but you know that many teachers of manifestation live privileged lives. And obviously a lot of that's been laid bare this whole year. I feel like with Black Lives Matter and everything, I feel like, hopefully most people have been given the opportunity to really like listen and to really start learning. And so how can we begin to make sure that we're approaching spirituality without losing social progression or helping others to also have that growth? Because the thing is, sorry, I'm just going to flesh this out. The thing is, like, as much as manifesting and visualization can bring things to you, we still cannot deny that there are like systemic physical things that hold people back from having the same chance as someone else does for manifesting something. I don't know. I'm just saying that. So if you have thoughts on anything, please go for it.
Yeah, no, 100%. See, I think that's exactly my point, is that like with personal growth, like we're always going to have to work on ourselves. We can always, be more mindful, be more peaceful, be more, whatever the case may be more forgiving. But because we can work on ourselves for a full lifetime, we have to incorporate community care in that, because we're never going to be fully fixed. Like, you can really just start seeing yourself as whole, and you can start accepting your mistakes, but you're never going to get to a point where you're like, I'm perfect, I'm flawless, I'm never going to make another mistake again. Like, so if that's our goal, and sometimes we don't realize it, but subconsciously, especially with the constant messages of you need to be better, you need to set better goals, higher goals, blah, 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 that just keeps adding on to what you think you need. And we don't have to be perfect to start caring about other people. Like, you can do both, and they'll feed into one another. The more that you work on yourself, the better equipped you are to help other people. And the more that you help other people and see what a difference certain, concepts or certain just ways that you've reached out, seeing what a difference that can make to other people, that's going to help you start to feel better and see what you can, do to enhance that for other people even more, So I think that's important. And then also with manifesting and the difference between that and like structural issues, I think my problem really with a lot of people that talk about manifesting, because I love it and I love watching those channels and learning more about it, but one of my main issues with it is that sometimes it can kind of bring forth cycles of shame, or it can place all the blame on you. So like, if you lost your job, did you necessarily manifest that? No. And so I think like that's one of those things. It's like, sometimes people will act like your thoughts are always manifesting whether you want to or not. And that like intensity with how much your thoughts are creating your real life, like it makes people feel like they created the bad things that have happened to them, or it makes people feel like maybe they're responsible for trauma that they've faced. And that's definitely not true. So I think it's important to remember that like manifesting is something that it's something that you can work towards, but it's almost better to think of it as like, I'm switching it on and switching it off, because then you're not worried that anytime you have a negative thought, it's going to present in reality. Like, that's just such a toxic cycle to be stuck in. But with structural racism, like, are you really going to look at someone in the face and tell them to manifest away racism? Like, who has really the balls to say that to someone? Like, it's crazy to really think that. And so I think separating that idea of anything that happens to you was because you thought it, and the idea that like sometimes the world is chaotic. Like, if you don't have any thoughts, the world is still going to exist around you. Like, if you're meditating, the world doesn't stop. And so that's a distinction that we have to make in the manifestation space, is like, you're not making all these bad things happen to you, but you can control how, you deal with them, or you can control how you bounce back from a certain situation. And those things take time, but to place so much shame and so much blame on certain people, that's where the problem lies, just with manifesting. And with structural racism, like, I mean, it exists. Like, you just have to, start reading about it and opening your mind to it. And again, it really starts with like the small little changes that you can do in your corner of the world.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, there's so much I want to unpack from this, because I feel like there's so many different layers. And I know that Gary Zukav, again, in The Seed of the Soul, talks about how he believes that we've had past lives and that each life comes with its own karma. So you might not even be aware of like trauma or things about the soul that are holding you back. I'm not sure I'm 100% on board with it yet, but I'm like working through that. But I think it's interesting, because this is the conversation I love having, is like, what is the line? Because with manifesting, there is an extent to where the thoughts you're having, the beliefs you have about yourself keeps you at a certain level of receiving, right? And that's just, to me, that's a fact. Like that's going to happen. And then there are instances where you're doing your best with your thoughts. You're trying to stay aligned, whether through meditation or just doing like those practices to have high vibe energy. And even with high vibe energy, you're right. There are certain things that just happen. And so I feel like in those instances, do we look at it as I lost my job, even though I've been like working on my beliefs, I've been positive. The universe is a loving universe. It's not going to just punish me because I'm not perfect. It knows my intention. It knows my heart. And so if I lost my job, do you look at it as like, okay, how can I evolve from this? Like, how can I grow from this? What is this trying to teach me? Because it's not that it's my fault. It's not that I'm shamed into like losing my job, but like, I would think of it as like, okay, this is an opportunity to heal something within me, or to like, maybe this is setting me up for the ultimate goal or manifestation or whatever. Like, how would you find that line?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, that's actually crazy because that was my experience at the end of 2019. I lost my job because the company closed down that I was working for. And, a couple months later, this pandemic hit and everything, has just been crazy since then. So in 2019, when I lost my job at the very end of the year, it was around Christmas time. Like it was a terrible time of the year to lose my job. I had no idea, what to do and where to go. And I really did feel depressed. And I felt like, I'm working so hard on myself. I'm working so hard in every area of my life. Why do I deserve this? And having all those thoughts. And, thankfully I did have a supportive community around me, and I was actually sharing with them like some of the things that I didn't really want to tell anyone, at least finding one or maybe two people to open up to. And they kind of reminded me like, no, you're okay. You've got this. But I had to make that series of decisions time and time again. Like, no, this is your time to be at home and to work on your business. And I just kept trying to force myself to look at the bright side of everything. And, if it hadn't been for, that, I wouldn't be where I am now. I wouldn't have started a podcast even. And then, in February, before the pandemic officially hit, I traveled for a job interview. I was like 5 interviews into the process. I was, and they emailed me back. They were like, we loved you, but we've closed the position and we decided not to hire anyone. And so they're like, look out for other jobs in the future because we like you. And I'm like, well, that doesn't help me now. And so I, got frustrated again. But then it was that job, because it was before the pandemic, it was a commuting position. So I would have been gone like 9-10 hours out of my day with the commute. And after not being able to get that position, I was able to enroll in B school and learn more about my business and kind of growing that way. And so it was like all these decisions that like really kind of pulled me in and made me face all of these doubts about myself, all of this kind of tendency to self-sabotage as well. That was a big part of it, because I'm like, well, this happened to me and I'm not good enough and I deserved it. And something I did, made this happen, or all those thoughts kind of funneled into one another. And I had to realize like, but I have a choice right now. Like I can decide to keep fighting, which I know I always do, or I can decide to let this really be the end of me. And I'm so much better than letting that job be the end of me. Like that just doesn't, when you really put it in that perspective, you're like, I have to keep going. Of course, it's the only option, but being able to feel like you have a choice over the matter is really what helped me. And so again, just, I wouldn't have even written that Medium article and had the time to realize how frustrated I was if I was at those jobs. And so it's just crazy how things work. But just you got to trust the universe and put your work into it, put some effort into it, and try to just keep, making what you want to happen as much as you can.
And do you think you would have learned what your self-doubts were, your self-sabotage, all of those things that you told me you just learned? Would you have learned it harder or faster any other way?
Definitely not. It would have been a much slower process.
It's amazing. I think it's such a cool question that I ask for myself as well, is like a good way to spin something that seems bad at the time. But it's like, imagine like you learned all of that just because that happened. It's like, great. That to me is a win. And granted, I'm not saying like systemic racism, all those things. No, like you can definitely learn from that, but we need to work on that. But still, I feel like it's really cool to kind of get into that space of like, okay, if this is not working, what can I learn from it, rather than putting the blame on yourself? Like, this is not your fault. Like there's a reason this is here, and maybe there's not a reason this is here, but I can create that reason and I can make it meaningful. And I think in addition to that, making sure that we have that kind of outlook, but then also help our brothers and sisters, because I feel like we are here to help each other. Like our interactions with someone else, that's an evolution experience. Like you can choose to evolve from every conversation you have. Like I've had clients where things didn't work out the way I wanted to, but man, did I learn some amazing things from that. And I love that you said as well in this article that, it's a common belief that the universe has our back, which Gabby Bernstein coined, but you said, but we are the universe. So it's not that the universe has our back, we are the universe. And so it's like, we really need to start seeing each other as one. And it's just, we're one, but we're just manifesting differences. Like differences to me means that your soul was meant to like have all these different cool things about it. My soul's meant to have these different cool things about it, but we're still at our essence one. And we need to start like pulling each other up and like walking together and being side by side and really like treating this as like a one movement, not just a me movement, if that makes sense.
100%. Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of people don't even realize like the power that they have. And that's how I felt for so long too. Like I was like, I have such a small audience, like no one's necessarily paying attention to what I say. So why would I shout people out or tag people or blah, blah, blah? It just felt kind of pointless for me to do that. But I had to realize like, okay, but I do have this small following and I am a person on the internet. So I created this space so I could be what I wanted to see. And so why am I not doing that? And I had to kind of step back and correct myself and say, okay, these are, the friends or the people or the coaches that I really admire or are doing something cool or are putting forth great ideas, and just shouting them out or asking them to collaborate with me. And I used to be so terrified of that. I was like, I need to have X amount of subscribers and followers and this and that before I can even have that conversation to, be on someone's podcast or ask someone to be on my YouTube channel or whatever it is. And so, but really, even just since that article and having a couple people reach out to me, now I'm not afraid to reach out to other people either, because I realize it's just about relationships and making those connections. And so, yeah. Did that even answer the question, or did I just get off topic?
Yeah, no, we're just having a conversation. Like I love hearing what I say inspires in you and vice versa. So it's totally fine. Yeah. So for someone listening who's like, okay, this idea of like expanding my idea of what spirituality is, positive spirituality, like what is something that we can start doing to maybe get used to the idea or to know how that looks in our own life?
I mean, well, okay, I guess I could say this in two ways. So is it more like something that they should recognize when they see things kind of out in the wild, or more like how they should internally, I guess, perceive?
Why don't we do both? Because I feel like internally is like you, and then externally is like starting to include other people. So like, yeah, I guess break it down for me. Like, I'm just like, oh, I have always just done the typical spiritual stuff. How can I start thinking more community-based or acting more community-based, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So I would say the first step is define your community, right? Because we belong to different communities. So, whether it's part of like your friend group, your family, your book club or sports team that might not, be happening right now. And then even your communities online, like, are there certain groups that you follow, or even like Facebook groups that you're in? Really anything, even if it's just kind of like fringe friends that you have online that are still interested in the same topic. So just jot down like a quick bullet list of, what your communities are. And then from there, you can say, okay, like, is there one way that I could step up in one of these communities? So whether that's going online and all your friends or all the people that you think are doing something great, even someone with a great Etsy shop, whatever it is, can you use your platform to shout them out or something like that? Or, if it's, something with family or people in your real life, if you're able to see them or if you're already living with them, is there something that you could do just to take something off of your like wife's hands or your husband's hands, or something that you could do to take extra time and play with your kid? Just those little things. And like like I said, we make it so complicated. But even if you're thinking about like your neighborhood, and your neighborhood or your street is particularly close knit, having one of those free books or free canned, things out there is also helpful because as well as we think people might be doing, especially now, we never know when people need help. And if you take that pressure off of someone having to come to you to ask for help and you just kind of put it out there as like a community offering, then that's so much easier for that person. And then they feel more like they belong in the community. You know what I mean? But you're not going to go to everyone's door and ask, hey, do you need food? Like, I mean, maybe you do, but that could come off a little differently. Whereas if you are driving down the street and you see free food and it says, free, then like, that's something that you can respond to in a much better way. So yeah, I mean, those are just some of the things, even just giving to charities or promoting certain charities or nonprofits or even candidates this close to the election, and kind of starting those conversations as well, just online or in person. So there's so many ways. So I would just look at your community and then ask, what's one thing that you can do, and just start there.
I love that. That's such a great, tangible way to get started. And it kind of reminds me, it's almost like creating a space for people to feel safe, to feel included, to feel welcomed. And it's those little actions that can instill that kind of feeling into people. And so before we log off, I want to talk about two terms now that I also saw in your article. And it can be brief, it can be whatever you want, but we've already talked about toxic positivity, toxic spirituality. And from what I've gathered, it means it's toxic when there's shame involved, when there's like a disconnected sense of like actual like rooted soul feeling. You know what I mean? It's more like trendy or like on the surface. Would you add anything else to that definition or term?
Yeah, I mean, I think with toxic spirituality, I think just being aware of denial. So like, are you in denial of your problems? I mean, like that sounds so big to like really wrap your mind around and really recognize what that looks like for you. But that's a big part of it. If someone is like, if you're coming across someone else on the internet that's shaming you, that's definitely important, like a huge red flag. But another one is if certain pages make you feel like you have to be completely perfect, and influencer pages sometimes do that to us, but also it can be that personal growth space that is saying, they're only kind of pointing out the negative side of what you currently are, but not necessarily helping you with getting there, not necessarily being transparent about maybe their own journey or even, client stories or anything like that. Like they're not showing the hard process, and they're not allowing you to be forgiving to yourself, but they're just saying, you're wrong for doing this. Like you're bad for doing this. I would say like that aspect of it is definitely the worst. And then internally is that sense of denial. So if you are reading something that does kind of call you out and you feel like that healthy sense of call out, like, oh, I actually do that, I actually want to shut that away immediately and never think about that again. It's like that kind of rapid succession of thoughts that we have when we're being called out. That's a good time to, if you're immediately running away, just check in and let yourself know, like, it's okay to make a mistake. It's okay if I've done something wrong. It's okay if I'm not perfect. And just like letting yourself kind of sit in that spot and not immediately being like, how can I unpack this? How can I change my life? How can I be better? Blah, blah, blah. But just allowing yourself to recognize that maybe that's a tendency that you have, and that's okay. And just kind of sit with that for a second. And it'll unfold as time goes on. But when you're allowing yourself to be okay with thinking that, that's where kind of the magic happens. And so I would say, like, from that internal process, you know that you are spiritually bypassing when you don't want to actually face the negative emotions, when you don't want to leave your comfort zone, when you want to tell other people how they should be, but you don't necessarily want to take that advice for yourself.
Yes, that was the next term I wanted to talk to you about, because I heard you mention spiritual bypassing, and I was wondering, I want to hear your definition or your idea of that. And so is spiritual bypassing where you go to the rah-rah spiritual development conferences, you do the yoga, you do the matcha lattes, like you do all these things, but not as like a genuine way to like better yourself, but to avoid what you actually are dealing with? Like, is that correct? Or what do you think about that term?
Yeah, no, 100%. That was a perfect definition. Like just, doing everything on the outside, buying the Lululemon pants and going to your studio and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, not realizing like that you make mistakes, not realizing that there are things that, you might have that are toxic traits or are affecting people around you negatively. And, Yeah, I would say like, it's definitely a balance. You should love yourself. You shouldn't think that you're bad for having things that you are working on, but you should be working on, something, most of the time, or like, at least like, I don't know, that I feel like that's just kind of a constant dialogue in my head, but you have to be okay with knowing when it's too much and when you're just kind of coaching yourself through things, I guess, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
And not using inherently good tools as a way to avoid rather than dive deeper. Cause like what you were saying before, like, oh, some people, when they feel like something's needs to be faced or dealt with, rather than like sitting and accepting and going through it to work through it and come out the other side, it's more like run away from it. And I feel like we can use outward spiritual actions as a way to like convince ourselves and others that, oh, I got this. Like I'm working through stuff, when really you're just running away from it.
Right, exactly. Like most spiritual work is invisible. Most personal growth work, like you're not going to see it, and as tangible as it gets is maybe like notes in a journal or something like that. Like it really is such an internalized process, and you're not going to get there by, like you said, doing yoga and doing all these external spiritual things. It really is about asking yourself hard questions and correcting yourself. And I try to think of like self-parenting as the best way that I can put it, because self-parenting kind of encompasses like the disciplinary side of self-care as well. So like self-care can be having those tough conversations with yourself as much as it is having a nice bath and giving yourself, a vacation or an hour off or whatever it is. And so facing those, asking yourself, why am I like this? Or, why did it serve me to have this habit? Why did this coping mechanism help me for so long? And why does it not help me now? Why am I holding myself back? Like these are big questions that it can take us a long time to answer. But when those general answers are in your head, or when those are things that you journal about, even if it's once a week, like again, I don't want anyone to feel like they're bogged down and have to think about this stuff 24/7, but that's really where the spiritual work and the personal growth is done. It's done by, making changes in yourself, but also coming from a place of love and understanding of both yourself and the world around you.
Yes. And I feel like for me, making changes, like you said, for me, it's aligning my personality with my soul. I feel like the personality, and this is again from The Seed of the Soul, such an amazing book, but the personality is a smaller version of your soul. And it's what the soul uses to navigate the physical plane and to evolve and to grow and to heal things within itself. And often the personality is ego-based and it wants instant gratification. It wants things that are easy, like the whole thing. And so I feel like my daily battle that I've been focusing on is my personality lining up with what my soul wants? Like, is every action I'm taking aligned? Is everything that I'm feeling, like where is that on the spectrum? Is that on the soul spectrum? Is that on personality? So it's like kind of just like a self check-in. Like you said, it doesn't take, every second of your life. It's just knowing where you're at and are you aligned? And so I think that's really important. And so the last thing, I don't know if I'll open a can of worms with this one, but another term that I saw you mention was cultural appropriation. And so I just wanted like your thoughts on what that means.
Cultural appropriation, really kind of going back to the yoga example, it's about, A, do you even know what culture this came from? B, do you know kind of any semblance of like the history or maybe the origin of it, or just kind of those things. Like I'm not asking you to be able to recite like a full history on meditation and yoga, but just knowing like, okay, it came from this culture. These are the people who used to practice it. This is why it was developed. And those just kind of those key foundational pieces will help you understand where something came from. And then from there, you can realize, okay, if I'm going to be doing this activity, then can I find someone from that culture who I can learn from? So little simple things like that can help you. Like you don't have to avoid certain practices because you're not originally from that culture, and you can appreciate other cultures and learn from them. And again, that's part of what helps us understand other cultures and understand other people, is by, being part of their culture and dabbling in those things. But at the same time, it's again, where is that money going? Who am I benefiting by taking it here or learning from this person? How can I give back to that community? So maybe in your area, you don't have, an Indian yoga teacher at all. Okay. But is there a way there's so many nonprofits and organizations in India that you could donate to online. So if you're, going to a yoga studio, is there like 10% of that money that you can give to the actual source of who created yoga, And so I think that's a really important part of it, but also just knowing that so many people were not able to practice their own spiritual gifts, their own spiritual, their own like cultural, I don't know, I guess their own religions, their own ceremonies, like all those things were things that people were banned from practicing due to colonization and due to things like that. And so because of that, it's like, why would I keep feeding into that process of colonizing this art form or colonizing this spiritual practice? Because that is so far removed from what the practice actually is. And one of those things that I'm talking about is burning sage, right? So I knew when I was first buying sage that, it was important. I knew it came from indigenous spaces, and I knew that I needed to like ethically source my sage, which I definitely did do. I did a lot of research and made sure, it was from the right sources, but realizing that indigenous peoples were like banned from using sage and banned from their own practice until very recently, that's something that made me question, okay, should I be doing this at all? Because that's a huge show of my privilege and where I am right now, while there are indigenous people all over the US and Canada that are still having their rights taken away from them, that are still dealing with the ramifications of what colonization has done to their nation or their people. And so because of that, like, you just have to realize that you're getting into something that's so much deeper than you think it is. And that's how it is with no matter what culture or what practice it is, even meditation, like there's so many things that really came from like these beautiful roots that you never would have thought of or understood until you take the time to learn those things. And honestly, learning those things is enriching because it's going to bring so much more into your practice. So it really is going to help you in the end to find these sources, find these good teachers, find ways that you can give back, because then you're doing it from a place of love, understanding, and also appreciation more than appropriation, because you're not taking away from those communities.
Yeah, that's powerful. And you're right. I think it would make the experience more beautiful if you know the connection or the roots of that practice. And even with other things, maybe you don't feel right supporting a certain practice because, just like what you said with the sage burning, like the opportunity to do that was taken away from the very people who created it. And it's like, why should I get to then do it feeling just fine about myself? Like I probably wouldn't feel okay with it either. And so I think that's wonderful. And it kind of takes us back to intentions, right? So like having that pure rooted intention in everything that you do. And I feel like, that's really what it is. What is our intention with every action we're taking, every thought we have, every belief we have? And I feel like we can better know our intentions when we have the full picture, or we have at least a little bit more information behind things and not just taking things so face value. And really, it's like almost like an ownership or a responsibility to show up in the purest way that we can, right? So, if something's not right for someone else, I want to help them, whoever that person is or that community is. I want to help them. Anyways, I don't know if I'm making sense, but like what you said was just really powerful. And I appreciate everything that you shared. And so what are a few spiritual leaders that you really appreciate and value?
I actually just found someone on Instagram. I want to make sure I get her name right. So I'm just going to check her page really quick. But her name is, I believe, Rosa Manzales. I'm just double checking. But she talks a lot about like decolonizing, and her name is Dr. Rosales Meza. She talks a lot about, the kind of indigenous roots in spiritual practices, about decolonizing, about what rest means, and what, how we as BIPOC can grow and learn from, and really unlearn from so many of the things that we've been taught and things that we've internalized. Mujer medicine is another one that I've been loving. And she talks about similar things, especially related to moon cycles and nature and kind of your feminine energy. So those are two ones that I've been just learning so much from. And I think I'm really kind of embracing like learning more about decolonizing. So that's kind of where my head's been lately.
And then are there any books that you're loving right now?
Ooh, books. I've really just been kind of like in a fiction space recently. So I've been loving like Isabel Allende and stuff, but I haven't read too much self-help recently. But I would say if anyone hasn't read Everything is Figure Outable by Marie Forleo, that was one of my best self-help reads of 2020. So throwing that out there because it was super encouraging and positive.
Awesome. Roshni, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me and going wherever the wind took us today on this conversation. Yes. I always feel like I learned so much from you when we talk, and I'm really excited to see where you grow and how you expand in what you're doing. So where can everyone find you if they want to connect with you?
Yeah, so I am at BETI Grew Up on Instagram and YouTube. I'm not very active on Twitter, but I am there as well. And I also have a podcast called Is It Worth It? The Self-Worth Podcast. So that is at anchor.fm/BETI Grew Up.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Francesca. Thanks for having me. This was super amazing, and I always love chatting with you.
Now it's time for an affirmation. I release any practice or belief that no longer serves my highest good and work to support others in evolving to their highest good. If you found today's tips inspiring or thought-provoking, share it right now on social media and make sure to tag me at Francesca A. Phillips or at Find Your Good Space, and also weigh in the comment section at findyourgoodspace.com. You can find links in the show notes. And if you have a spiritual or mindfulness problem that you want me to unpack on an upcoming The Good Space episode, or an awesome manifesting story you want to share, give my podcast phone line a ring right now at 917-719-0867. Also, don't forget to download my free morning routine guide. It's what helped me reduce my anxiety, increase productivity, and so much more. The link to everything I mentioned is in the show notes. See you soon.